Hi, welcome to the Success for Life podcast. And we're on live here with Chaz Jackson, author, speaker, someone who goes around speaking to the youth, who goes and tries to help people achieve, their own best life. Former football player, collegiate football player like myself. So there's naturally a connection there. So welcome to the podcast. I'm glad to have you on.
Thank you for having me, Coach.
So we talked a little bit briefly offline. Tell everybody your background, where you come from, and kind of a little bit about your journey.
Yes, and before I even get started, again, thank you for allowing me to be here on your platform and just being able to shine the light that I'm able to. For me, originally from North Carolina, played my collegiate ball back in North Carolina, small town, Varsity, North Carolina, where I grew up. Again, played at Western Carolina University, had the opportunity to have some phenomenal memories made there at that university. I am now reside here in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas. So actually recently moved last year, so still kind of new in the area, but definitely bigger than the town that I came from, the small town friendly Varsity, North Carolina. But I wear many hats, Coach. My husband, father of two beautiful daughters, as you mentioned before, teacher, coach, and trainer. Where I love focusing on youth leadership, so working with seniors and college freshmen, student athletes, in regards of just gaining more clarity, focus, and consistency on and off the field. And I love, challenging undeveloped leaders as they strive to accept coaching and training in regards of, finding more clarity, like I previously mentioned, getting good accountability, what that looks like, and also, just finding a general purpose for their life. So for me, I love to deliver that through speaking engagements. Also, me being that mentor as far as coaching and training as they see fit. And I enjoy it. I love it. And for me, thinking from a student athlete perspective, dating back when I played ball, I would constantly, that's what my focus was and where it should be, but I created my entire identity through sports. And what I like to do with my young athletes is really get them to think on a broader span. Yes, you are that student athlete, draw the line, plug in a blank, your sport, and there is some other things that you can accomplish outside of sports. You don't have to completely put your identity there because, everybody don't go to the league, if that makes sense. So for me, what else can we create and develop as far as, for me, growing as an entrepreneur and really not isolating myself just as far as an athlete, because thinking back on my journey, Coach, I did that, and whenever my career ended, it was like a culture shock for me because all I had my identity set on was being an athlete. So again, just allowing, athletes and our young people to understand that, hey, yeah, this is a beautiful thing, that sport, but you can strive and develop other skills as well along your journey.
How did you figure that out for yourself? Obviously, I'm sure you had dreams going on to the NFL, and as I did too back when I played. Although I played a little bit before you, but not that much. A little older, not that. How did you work through that yourself, and and how did you make that transition to where you are now? You're a published author. You're coaching kids on where they should be and helping advise them and speaking. How did you make that transition?
Wow, Coach. So it took some time. A lot of failure was involved. So one of the things, specifically, with, freshman college athletes that we talk about is, really setting a plan for post-college at that time. And that's one of the things that I didn't do, to be honest, man. I kind of fell into the the whole college lifestyle. I was out of my grandmother's house. I didn't have a curfew, and it was actually, I was close to actually flunking out my freshman year just because of some of those poor decision makings. But I got back on track and got a little bit more focused. But one of the things, even fast forwarding to my senior year, I remember getting my diploma, coaching, and just being thrown out into reality. And one of the things that I discovered, even looking back at that time, is schools can teach you things to think about, but not truly how to truly think about them. And one of the things that I teach some of my younger student athletes is the networking aspect of things. I had this piece of paper, but at times, as the cat down the road told me once, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And for me, I remember graduating, my career was over, graduating with this piece of paper in which I got a double degree in sales and marketing entrepreneurship, thinking I was going to get out, get this six-figure job, live the high life. And my first job was at Papa John's, right out of school. My dreams of, being a professional athlete, it kind of faltered at that time. And this was back in 2010 when I got out of school. And then my first job was there. So it was like a culture shock to me. Like I went from this, guy that was looked at as high tier athletes, star linebacker. And then I was working at Papa John's. So that was a culture shock for me. But again, some of the things that truly worked for me and really getting and discovering my true calling was understanding that failure was my friend in a sense, meaning like, the things that was happening in my life, I have to take those situations and learn from them. Even fast forwarding, to the 2012, I had in that period from 2010 to 2012, it went into somewhat of a depression state, if you will. I started drinking more, and I found myself actually, coach, in awakening to a car horn where I had passed out briefly. By the grace of God, I woke up, and I remember turning that wheel to the right, inches away from a head-on collision. I remember crashing into a wooden gate. Police was called. I was arrested for being under the influence of alcohol. And I remember being in this jail cell, coach, and made a bunch of poor decisions when I got out of college, to be honest with you, simply because I kind of lost my way, kind of going back to what I was sharing, putting all my identity in sports, and I didn't truly know how to transition. Again, found myself behind bars, and there was just a lot of emotional baggage that Chaz was just carrying that kind of built me up to that moment in 2012. But by my fiance at the time, my wife, sticking by my side and sharing and giving me encouragement, and me really taking a step forward and really interrogating that emotional baggage, what I just mentioned. And whenever I say emotional baggage, I mean, problems that I truly didn't have a solution for. And normally when we have those things that, and we can draw the line and plug in the blank of situations, traumas and dramas, circumstances, stuff that I can even think about going back to when I was started at 5 years old, things that just wasn't dealt with for Chaz Jackson. And, I began to really interrogate that, really examine, hey, why was I putting myself in these poor decisions, situations, and what was really going on there? So for me, again, failing, learning that it wasn't the enemy, taking that step of really trying to, discover and overcome some of the things that was going on inside of me. And once I really took that transition of gaining more clarity and gaining focus and consistency, fast forwarding to the day led by God, me being a man of faith, that was one of the biggest decisions that I made. I was able to truly discover some tips and techniques to truly help myself get out of that slump that I was in, that I feel personally came from me losing that identity in sports. And gosh, man, there's been so many good things that happen along that journey. But again, one of those things of me truly finding an identity outside of sports, again, getting good accountability around me. I feel like that's really important. Mentors, coaches, people that can pour life into me. And that led me on a journey of finding purpose for my life. And one of those purposes is helping student athletes or anybody in general that's lost something that they truly cared about, and wanting and willing and wanting to find a way to overcome some of those barriers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. So let's unpack a couple of things there. So faith. I mean, much like you are. I mean, uh, I'm a big fan of Jesus Christ and a follower of the Lord, and when I placed my faith and my trust in the Lord, I think that enabled me to handle a lot of situations. Even though I grew up as a Christian, and as you probably went through your process, I ended, for me at least, I ended up getting saved in like 2008, 2009 time period. Even though I'd grown up a Christian, I needed that kind of rebirth, and I needed every day, I guess, because but knowing that and living for the Lord helps, I think, keep a lot of things in place. And much like you, when I was at college, obviously playing ball was so important to me. I was a very good student, but a lot of it was because I had a certain just aptitude for school. It wasn't that I did anything extra per se. But that finding the Lord and really getting in touch with him, I think helped guided me after that process where I was no longer a player. And I wish I had more of it when I was a player, you know what I mean? Because
I truly agree with that.
College, you're having a good time, you're playing ball, you're having a good time, all those kind of things. It would have helped me. I think the athletes that, or anyone in general, that find their way from that standpoint, it definitely can help center you, I think, a lot in knowing that God's got the ultimate plan. So that part I thought was really interesting. The second part I thought was really interesting. I'll let you expound on both of those, and then I would definitely want to hear your plan of how you tell kids what to do from that standpoint, or anybody, adult as well. It doesn't have to be a youngster, but because it applies to them too. But when I finished playing, okay, and I was there for another year, finishing grad school. When I was done playing, the biggest thing that I think I missed was the void of the competition, right? Now I coached football for a long time, so it gives you a little bit of a fill in that void. But for a lot of people, I didn't coach right away. That void feeling is where you get that you've worked so hard your whole life for a certain thing, and then it ends and you're very young, right? And you don't realize it when you're a young kid going through it, but you really are. Your career ends and you're very young if you don't make the NFL. You're 22, 23, 24 years old, and you're very, very young, and you've poured so much into it, and that competition void is gone. That excitement, that thing that you're looking forward to. How did you eventually handle that part of it? Because I know I struggled with it. I know a lot of athletes, when they go into their career, struggle with it. What are some of the things and tips that you want people to understand of how you can balance the fact that you want to be a competitor with figuring out the important aspects of maybe your post-competitive career as in life?
So for me, and that's a really good question, Coach. Kind of expounded on some of the other things that you said too before I even dive into that. So even dating back to when I was younger, I can remember at 13 years old, me accepting Jesus Christ, me being baptized at this camp, the South Mountain Christian Camp. But as I was expounding, going through my teenage years on to college, I didn't really walk that walk, if that made sense. I remember going to church, and it was more like on holidays, like we got Easter Sunday coming up. That would be one, and Christmas. It wasn't, and the teachers that was in church wasn't really expounding in my household. And for me growing up, poverty environment where in my neighborhood it was normal for me to see the alcoholics, it was normal for me to see drug addicts. So that's kind of going back to some of those emotional baggage that I was carrying, traumas and dramas, different situations that was going on that created an identity for Chaz Jackson. And I talk a little bit more about that in my book, Live, Learn, Lead Powerfully, on some of those traumas and dramas that I was just carrying that never really had a solution. But as we progress on, up into my college years and into my, adulthood in general, whenever I really discovered those tips and techniques of how to overcome that stuff, because one of the things that I use sports for, and I'm sure a lot of people that's listening can relate to that if you're an athlete, is that aggression, that competitiveness. Whenever you have that emotional baggage, the sport actually helped me carry that bag. Like, I can go out on the field and I can pound on somebody. I was a running back and a linebacker, so like when stuff would happen at home, you can actually legally get on the field and let your energy pour out on somebody. I mean, that was a relief for you, that whole competitiveness and the brotherhood, your teammates. Definitely back in high school, man. I mean, growing up from Mighty Mites all the way up to high school, you really have that bond and having all those situations apart. But I guess to kind of come back to 2021 with what I'm sharing, to answer you is how did I overcome that, was finding my true passion outside of football. And in some of those circumstances, like I was sharing back in my childhood and my teenage years, even coming into college and being in that situation, that car accident. I know I've kind of bounced on some different subjects briefly, but for me, I don't want a child, if I can prevent it, to go through anything that Chaz Jackson went through. So when thinking about being competitive or finding, something to take that place, because obviously after something's removed, you have to replace it with something. I did try to replace it with alcohol, but I made a ton of bad decisions. So I had to eject that by the grace of God. And I'm also happy to say to the audience, I haven't had a drink of alcohol. It'll be 9 years this upcoming June. So I just wanted to share that. But me replacing that was with a passion to help others and to serve. Being a follower of Christ, he said, I did not come to be served, but to serve and be a ransom for many. So for me, I found that serving other people was a sense of fulfillment for me. So, and also you can use some of the tips and techniques and some of your experience as an athlete in your business, if that makes sense. Like, you can be competitive, with whatever ideal that, God's leading you to do. And secondly was just getting around hope givers. I know I talked about accountability. And what's funny, there's two hope givers that I talk about in my book. It was my coach, Coach Cosby. He was my high school defensive coach, and also a physical therapist. His name was Brandon. And there was two situations where these two individuals, they was very passionate about what they did and how they did things. And they left a footprint on my heart. And I remember those two individuals even in my 30s right now. And it's funny because of the hope that they gave me during times that I was going through storms. I got hurt my senior year in high school. The dream was to play at Clemson, for instance, for Brandon, the physical therapist. I broke my lower leg, coach, and him giving me hope, meaning, getting me back on the field when I thought my career was over, even though I didn't make my ultimate dream of playing at Clemson. But, by the grace of God, I was able to go to Western Carolina University. I was recruited by Matt Rule. He's the head football coach for the Carolina Panthers now. And I actually met him at Clemson football camp, to be honest. And it's funny how God works and works things out for you. But I say that to say this, meaning, really what helped me is to find passion, to kind of withstand and use some of the tips and techniques I use in sports, but also to realize that I can be a hope giver like my coach and Brandon was to me, meaning just installing water and, whatever person's placed in my path, seed of greatness. Because for me, I believe we all have a seed of greatness in us. Physically, we are a gift, but there's a gift inside of each and every one of us, and it's full of potential. That's what Gift and a Gift is all about. That's my brand. I'm a podcast host as well. And also, on that podcast, I talk about we're all gifted differently to make a difference. And again, those two things, that hope giver, just watering that seed of greatness to help whoever God places in my path by serving, bring their fruit to pass to share with the world. And I feel like that's the ultimate plan for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to serve is ultimately helps you get to all your goals, and I think that's a big part of it. And really awesome story. Book writing. So, tell me about you wrote 2 books. I know you're in the process of writing a third. First, tell me more about. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to read your book, so people for the listeners to really understand what your book's about. And then I want to talk about the book writing process because so many young people now, especially nowadays, want to write a book and tell their story or whatever their niche focus is on, but have no idea how to go about doing it. So first, tell me about your book in particular, and I know it's about gifting the gift, but expand upon more about that with your books.
Yeah, I would love to. So my first book was published back in 2019, Live, Learn, and Lead Powerfully. I truly believe, Coach, that book is strategically designed to launch anyone's mind towards greatness. And, I briefly talked about my story from, my childhood all the way to that 2012 car accident and the emotional baggage and, some of the steps, tips, and techniques that I took to kind of get where I am now. Back in 2019 when that book was published, as I was taking in so much information, a lot of that is being, led by God, me being a man of faith. And again, I mentioned the accountability aspect of things. So many amazing people was put in my path when I really, got intentional about changing, making that radical change, really, discovering another identity. And for me, even going even a little deeper, I had some very low self-esteem, low confidence. I didn't truly love myself, to be honest, Coach. And whenever I really discovered how to do that, how, Chaz Jackson, I'm okay. Like I truly care about myself. I truly love myself. Me being a John Maxwell coach, speaker, and trainer as well, I love John's philosophy for the team. And he says, each and every JMT member, I encourage you to value yourself, value others, and add value to others. So I say that to say this in regards of Live, Learn, and Lead Powerfully. I began to value myself. So then whenever I learned to value myself and I was really dived into the word, told us in the scripture, he said, love your neighbor as yourself. So as I begin to value myself, I tend to learn to value other people a little bit more than what I did at one point, right? And when you value other people, you want to add value. So again, going back to information, it was kind of like a forest was in my head. Like how a forest is really wild. Like I had all this information. And it was like, man, I got to tell somebody about this stuff, like this stuff that I'm discovering. And by the grace of God, I met Dr. Adair White. She's a publicist out of Atlanta, Georgia, phenomenal lady. And she helped me make it a garden, the information that I was accumulating. So that was kind of the birth of Live, Learn, Lead Powerfully, the tips and techniques that I use to overcome me, lacking the identity after I left school, and the things that I used to kind of overcome alcohol abuse and some of the other emotional baggage that Chaz Jackson was going through. And I kind of condensed it down into a team leadership guide, just hitting some principles, tips, and techniques that I did to kind of overcome some of my low beliefs about myself and to kind of get to where I am back in 2010 or 2019, sorry. And as far as the impact of influence, that book actually dropped this past Saturday. Chip Baker's phenomenal individual. Whoever's listening, check out the Success Chronicles. This is a phenomenal teacher, educator. He's a third generation educator. I met Chip last year. He was a guest on my podcast. I was actually introduced to him by Don Brightman, who's another amazing man of faith. The Going North podcast, both these podcasts are based on personal development. But as in this world, Coach, as you meet people, those people introduce you to people, and it's kind of like the spider wheel. But I met Chip the first time, just like me and you were talking, having a conversation, the first time I got in contact with the guy, I knew there was somebody that I wanted to be around more often. And he invited me to go on a journey with him to co-author in a book along with 15 other amazing men, where we created The Impact of Influence. And it actually made Amazon #1 bestseller this past Saturday in 11 categories. So super excited about that whole journey with that book. But I share briefly some of my story. The name of my chapter in there is I See Something in You, because in that whole inch of the chapter, going back to that car accident, a week and a half after me being locked up in jail, I went to visit my lawyer, and he shared with me how I was going to have to deal with some jail time, and kind of telling me how things are going to be a little bit tougher for me to get back on track, because at this point in 2012, I had lost my car, coach, I lost my job. I was losing my apartment. I was on eggshells with my fiance. I was just, in a really depressed state by, my alcohol abuse. And I remember stepping out of the office and using the bathroom. My fiance kind of came out afterwards, and we was in the car, and she shared something with me that I marked as kind of like a transition of my life. And I kind of talked about this. It's kind of poured over and lived on me powerfully. But she said something that just changed my whole perspective of how I viewed myself, and it built a curiosity, if that makes sense. And it was based off of her saying, like, your lawyer just told me to leave you, Chaz. And I was like, what? What do you mean? He was like, he's never seen anybody come out of what I had already accumulated for myself, that you was going to drag me down with you, and I was just toxic to you. And at the time, I was just like, yeah, why don't you just leave me? I mean, I don't have any identity for myself. I'm just going to, go into this pit. I'm like, why don't you leave me? And she looked me straight in my eyes, coach, and she said, Chaz, I see something in you that you don't see in yourself. And, it took me, again, like I mentioned, to be intentional and make a change for myself. But that just, it rocked me to the core. And I feel like God used her as a conduit to say that to me, that I see something in you that you don't see in yourself. So I say that to say this, in that book, The Impact of Influence, that was a very influential moment for me, and to kind of transition to where I am now. And I enjoy saying that to our young people, coach. I see something in you that you don't see in yourself. And that something is that seed of greatness. And I'm just humbled and just proud to water people's seeds, man, because I feel like we all have fruit. It's great that I'm able to talk about scriptures, because in some avenues you're not able to really open up with Bible and all that good stuff. But it talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Love and joy, peace, patience. These qualities. That's what that seed is able to bring forth. And I would love to get someone in a position, talking about student athletes for this whole session, of being able to bring those qualities out to share with the world, man, because we all have that ability. And that's fulfilling to me, to serve and be able to get someone to that state of mind. But yeah, man, that's kind of the whole ideal about those
so powerful. So powerful. I mean, you're blessed. You're blessed to be able to figure that out, and God's working through you, and it's great to see that. It really is. And you're touching so many different people, and obviously with the book too, you touch not just the people you work with directly, but now you're touching the masses, which makes your reach infinite, right? Hopefully, makes it infinite. So that's awesome stuff. Before we talk, because I want to talk about how you wrote books, but you mentioned you trained with John Maxwell. I've read quite a few of his books. Obviously, for people who don't know, if you could pick up some of John Maxwell's books, or
guys, just check out his podcast. He has a podcast too. I know we're on a podcast, so I'm just throwing out podcasts from amazing people. But John Maxwell's podcast is just phenomenal, man. I love his work, man.
How did you go, and what did you go? Did you go in order to become a John Maxwell speaker? What did you do to go through that process? Because I think it's so cool, because you're young, and a lot of people will see someone like yourself and say, I I think I could do maybe something like this, but I don't know how, right? So to explain how you got. I know it's a little different from the topic, but I think this is
Yeah, no worries, man. No worries. Yeah. So obviously, if you don't know who John Mack, I mean, the guy, he's ranked like the #1 leadership expert. He's written over 80 books. I mean, I think there's like over 30,000 members now, like 38,000 members of John Maxwell team members. And just hearing that portion before I even got started, I'm just like, gosh, me doing what I'm doing. I mentioned that I shared that, I have a passion about helping undeveloped leaders find, clarity, find accountability, and find a purpose in life, because that's something that I didn't have after I got done playing sports. And after I discovered that's what I wanted to do, and I discovered John, I'm like, I mean, if he's the #1 guy talking about what I'm passionate about, what I feel like God's pointing me to do, I want to get around this guy. So I was first introduced, my pastor, Bill Kill, back in North Carolina, another phenomenal guy. I was talking about, mentors and coaches that kind of helped Chaz overcome some of those trials and tribulations. He was one of them, and he invited me to do a mastermind of John Maxwell. And it's actually John's book, Leadership. Whoever hasn't read that book, if you're a leader in whatever avenue, phenomenal book. I was sold on John then. This was about a couple years ago. And I did another mastermind with him. It was on one of John's books, Becoming a Person of Influence. Ironically, the impact of influence. But yeah, another phenomenal book. And again, after going through those with Bill and some of the other individuals that were part of those masterminds, I knew it was something that I wanted to pursue. It's not one of the cheapest pursuits, so it was one of those things where I had to get with my wife, and we prayed about it. And I kind of went on this journey and got on John's platform, and he has on there where you can take either a speaking or a coaching path. And me being a speaker, I took that path and went on a journey. And I actually became officially a certified John Maxwell team coach and trainer this year, actually this month. So this is a big month, man. Yeah. So that's kind of like a short ideal or journey for me with the John Maxwell. But with that whole program, you just have to be really intentional about, networking and asking questions. John constantly talks about that in his books, about asking questions and seeking a knowledge, because there's so much, man. I mean, I was just doing the IMC. Unfortunately, it's normally held in Orlando, Florida, but because of COVID, and the whole situation, it was virtually this past a few weeks ago. And yeah, man, it was. I mean, my brain was just swollen of information that John and his team kind of pour out there. But yeah, if you're really serious about being a leader in your field, you cannot go wrong with being a part of the John Maxwell team, or even just checking out his podcast. I mean, he's given tons of value. Him and Mark Cole is actually one of the hosts on this podcast, and John comes on there. But Mark Cole, he's like right beside John as far as being that leader expert. John's constantly pouring into him. But those guys, man, Chris Robinson, Paul Marinelli, the list goes on with those guys. Roddy, those guys are just phenomenal people to hold you accountable and just to learn from. So, yeah.
Very cool. Very, very, very cool. And last, and this is really flown by. This is great. A ton of information, and I appreciate the intentionality is a key component of working towards success. You got to be intentional in everything you're doing, and understand intentionality and how it relates to becoming successful, taking steps to be successful, taking steps down whatever your journey is. Writing a book. Tell me about that process. Was it easy for you? And how, what are some of the things that you think people need to be able to do in order to write a book like yourself. I mean, you've written two, and I think that it's unbelievable process there that you have to go through in order to get that done. Tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so guys, I feel like there's so many eggs that we can take with this.
Mm.
The first one that I want to say, and I feel like, it's very important even for you to even begin to write, is finding your voice. I think, we constantly been talking about, our younger people, and obviously this can be for adults too, obviously, but finding your voice. And Maya Angelou, she said a quote that I feel like will kind of bring us home with what I want to share. She says, "There is no greater agony." The word agony meaning mental suffering, than a bearing of an untold story inside of you. When I first heard that, Coach, man, I mean, it blew my mind when I really dissected what she was saying. There's no greater agony than the bearing of an untold story inside of you. There's so many untold stories. I know there's someone that's listening to us right now that has an untold story to where, if you grew up in a neighborhood like me, sharing your true self was a sign of a weakness. Like if you shared your emotions or share things that was really going on within you, a lot of times, when someone asks you how you're doing, you say fine. But really, if you really dissect that whole fine, there's a lot of stuff there. And granted, really opening up and exposing yourself. I talk about that in Live and Lead Powerfully, in the 3 B's, being predictable, being exposed, and being related. And one of the ways we can be exposed is really sharing what's going on inside of us, because, sharing, man, it actually takes some of the weight off of you. And I guess what I'm getting at is that no greater agony to bear an untold story inside of you. Your story can be like an oxygen mask to someone that's suffocating, right? Because right now, there's a lot of pain that's going on in this world. Your story is needed more than ever in 2021. So I think the first thing for anyone that's wanting to write or get started is really finding your story, finding your voice, knowing that your voice matters. Because there was a point in my life where I didn't feel like my voice mattered. I didn't feel like what I had to share mattered, and it does matter. And please believe me, you matter. Your story matter. And there's going to be certain people that I'm not going to be able to relate to you, that whoever's listening, you're going to be able to relate to. And same with me and you, Coach. And, again, I feel like we go through, everyone has a story. I've met people on my podcast in person, working in physical therapy. I haven't really got on that whole avenue of things, but
Right.
So many stories of people that's been through a ton more than me or been through less than me. So many things out there. There's nothing truly unique about me, but I feel like God used ordinary people to do extraordinary things, if that makes sense. And you are extraordinary who is listening to me. So find your voice. I also feel like, for me starting out early, I really needed that accountability. So I talked about Dr. Daryl White. She had already written like 15 plus books. I think she had wrote 16 books back in 2019. I think she's published a couple more since then. So thinking about the elevator of life, that makes sense. Let's say, you have your basement and the penthouse, if that makes sense. And she was kind of at that penthouse level. Let's say I'm gonna put her up there because she is amazing. She's a very humble lady, but she's amazing. And let's say like I was on level 2, right? Me seeing her up at the penthouse and me having a relationship to her, that gave me hope to say, hey, I can achieve that, right? So I say that to say this: getting around people that has experienced what you want to experience. John Campfield, he talks about success leaves clues. There's so many clues out there of things that you want to accomplish whenever listening to me, that people are wanting to help, man. Like, and that's one thing for me. Like, I kind of felt at one point in my life, if I ask questions, that shows that I'm stupid, or whatever the case may be, that's going to show a sign of weakness of me. People are not going to look at me as someone with integrity or leadership status asking questions. But man, that is one of the biggest lies that anybody can ever tell you. Ask questions, ask away, please. Because when you ask people questions, you're going to discover so much more, and you're going to accomplish so much more and getting help around you, because there's no body that's ever created anything massively who doesn't have a team around them or who has not asked for help. I mean, I mentioned John Maxwell was the #1 leadership expert. You think he did that by himself? Like, he has amazing people around him to help him get there. And I'm talking to myself here as well, is remembering that, hey, finding your voice, get around people that's already written a book, getting around people that already written a book to hold you accountable, to show you that it is real. And again, asking tons of questions, getting around people that's willing to answer those questions, to make things easier for you. And and once you kind of do that, for me, writing a book is really getting a good outline in place. And as you get other people involved and intentional about you wanting to write a book, a lot of that stuff's going to kind of play out for you. And that's what worked for me, is having people to hold me accountable. So
Yeah, accountability is a huge aspect of being able to get to where you want to go. Really interesting stuff. We didn't get to talk about much about physical therapy, but tell me how you got into that and how it relates to everything that you're doing right now.
So it kind of goes back to those two individuals of hope, right? So I talked about Coach Crosby, how he installed hope in me about being a collegiate athlete. Me growing up in that little small town, no one really went to Clemson University out of Forest City, North Carolina. So, he installed hope into me. I remember meeting him my freshman year, and I know you asked about physical therapy, but it's all going to make sense here in a minute. I remember going to my freshman year in high school, and me seeing him with a Clemson jumpsuit on, right? And I was like, man, that's where I want to play. And he was like, Chaz, if you work hard at this, we can get there, man. And he watered my seed, like I've been mentioning before, that seed of greatness that was inside of me, even though I wasn't aware of it the way I am now. But that's what he was doing. He gave me hope whenever, in other situations where I would ask other people, oh, man, you're not going to Clemson University. Ain't nobody from Forest City played at Clemson University. And all the naysayers, the critics. But he allowed me to be focused. And, man, we made it all the way to Clemson University's football camp. But, I mentioned how the injuries and me ending up at Western Carolina played out, which is one of the, the best things, because I met my wife at Western Carolina University, and I wouldn't be, like I said earlier, it's funny how things work out in life. But I mentioned that I got injured my senior year, and I feel like that was one of the biggest reasons I didn't go to Clemson, because I missed pretty much almost my whole senior year. But I met that therapist, Brandon, who, I was in that broken state. And he installed hope into me. He said, Chaz, if you do everything that I tell you to do, I can get you back to play football. And he got me back. I was able to play. And what's funny, Coach, I tell you, I say that those guys are hope givers, and I keep bringing them up. That I'm a coach now and I'm a therapist because they left a footprint on my heart. I remember I told you earlier that I graduated in entrepreneurship. And I was working for this sales company, great people, but I felt I was sitting in a cubicle and Brandon popped in my head. And I was like, man, there's something else I'm supposed to be doing. And I find myself doing all of this stuff because of how they impacted me, because they was very passionate. And guys, I'm doing exactly what they're doing, man, because they installed hope into me during some of my darkest times, if that makes sense. So yeah, man. So that's kind of my whole journey of becoming a physical therapist. I owe that to Brandon for being passionate about what he did. And man, I've met some phenomenal people along the journey. I work in orthopedics, and gosh, man, so many stories within that. And I love it just as much. It's a passion of mine as well. So, gosh, man, I constantly, say this, man. I'm definitely living my dream. And God, I'm excited about what God's doing, and I don't say any of that stuff to impress anybody. It's to press upon you if you allow God to take over your life, man, and really be intentional and get accountability and get real purposeful about serving. For me, that changed my life. So
Yeah, that finds your purpose. It helps you find your purpose, and being able to roll with it. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Tell everybody where they, first of all, your podcast. We got a lot to cover here. Your podcast, your books, and then obviously where they could reach out to you too if they want to get coaching or just want to conversate with you. Where could everybody find you?
Yeah. So definitely, again, Coach, thank you for having me on your show. It's been a pleasure, a treat. You're awesome. Whoever's not following this guy's the Successful Life podcast, please stick with this gentleman. I enjoy what you're doing even before I even get started on me. Thank you for shining your light with all the student athletes that you work with and how God's using you. That's phenomenal. But you can find me at chazjacksonspeech.org. That's my official website. On all social media platforms at Chaz Jackson Speaks. Also, my podcast that he was mentioning, Gift and the Gift, in which on that podcast I focus on tips and techniques for young males as they strive towards growing in personal development. And I started that podcast last year, and there's been so many phenomenal people that I've met through it. Phenomenal guests from all across the countries who's coming on the show to share their story and share how they're impacting the youth in their area of life. And so Live, Learn, Lead Powerfully is available. The Impact of Influence is available on Amazon, where you can reach out to me. And also, if you want to find out more about me, you can always catch me or get in touch with just a giant here, a coach here, and he'll link you to me. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect. And send me an email on that stuff, and I'll make sure we get it all in the show notes. That was great. I really enjoyed having you on. Your personality is infectious, and I could see the passion of what you're doing coming through. I wish you much continued success and most importantly, continued impact. Because I love the fact that you're working with young people and helping to help them grow. And making that impact there. So thanks so much for the Success for Life podcast. My guest, Chaz Jackson, Coach Schuman, signing off. Till next time.
Thank you, Coach.
Thank you.